I would now ask Jan for his contribution to this panel debate.
Okay, thank you. First, I don't have any PowerPoint presentation, which is good news for you. Well, it's a good news for me because it allows me to speak even faster. I have a kind of, I think, excuse for the translator because I don't think any single person on that room wearing headphones, except the interpreter. So anyway, just for your information. Anyway, I was trying to sketch some, thoughts about the recognition of a volunteerism, and I have a few points to make. The first is more kind of a linguistic, that although English is obviously not my mother tongue, but the recognition means different thing, obviously. And one thing is that it's basically, to recognize means that you can diversify, you can distinguish something, that something is a volunteerism and something is not volunteerism. And I think the first challenge is very often and more challenge to see what is really volunteerism. Even in a pure fact, in the methodology, you will see a more and more kind of I spent my 20 years as a sociologist basically trying to research, to measure, recalculate the number of volunteers. But basically you see more and more kind of blurring boundaries of what is really volunteerism. And I think that process, it's on the one hand, we have kind of an appetite to kind of a catch-all approach. So anything from the Wikipedia to basically basic reciprocity, even the family transactions will be soon perceived by necessity as a part of a volunteerism. But obviously it also means that you're losing the edge of distinguish, pure act of kindness from something, I wouldn't say it's selfish, but basically it's a necessity. So traditional concept of a volunteerism as being unpaid and kind of not forced. I think we, especially Europe, with all the demographic kind of challenges in front of us, I think that we will be forced to kind of rethink the whole kind of a concept and the language of volunteerism. I think we are okay on the fact of being unpaid, but it's not clear for me how long we can keep on this kind of unnecessary, if you like, if you know what I mean. The traditional equation of the welfare state is not longer going to work. Basically, a lot of the kind of internal motivation, a kind of a support from the family, community, self-help groups will be needed to basically match a lot of the challenges we face. Although it will be not paid work, definitely it will be kind of a necessity as opposed to opportunism or kind of a act of kindness or elegance. So that's the first thing. Second, the kind of understanding of recognition is basically, and in some countries, and Europe is very, very diverse in terms of what is volunteerism, even in the cultural meaning of that. You have some countries where some definitions of volunteerism will be completely shocking for the other part of Europe, and that's true. But it's true that in some countries there's even a problem of, in a sense, noticing. So it's not like awarding something, which is a very different meaning of a recognition. I think it's very popular here that the recognize means to prize someone. But to recognize also means that you even see that effect. And I think it's very important in the countries like Poland and many others. We don't have a kind of an impressive number of volunteers in this country. So probably it's very important actually to collect some basic facts about the level of volunteers in this country. It was done for many, many years, and as I said, I spent 20 years on this, and we work very hard, but it's basically unavoidable conclusion that we are very far from a kind of a European average, although in your mind probably Poland and this country might be treated and portrayed rightly as an icon of solidarity. And that was a time of a solidarity in this purest possible meaning of that. But last 20 years is a very heavily marked proselytism, a lot of people taking very individualistic, kind of even egoistic approach to life. And I mean, it's not about the moral judgment. I think there are thousands of, maybe not thousands, but tens of theories which might explain this. But this first 20 years, the pendulum is definitely on the other side. Right now, we're rediscovering the value of a common good, of collaboration, cooperation, while for 20 years we were preaching basically concept that the most effective way in everything is basically competition. So volunteerism, in a symbolic way, is tough because we can do different kind of fiestas about the recognition, but obviously the real thing is the question of embeddedness of that in a cultural and sociological context. context. As long as young people will treat the volunteerism as a kind of being, thing for losers, not being smart enough to get job, or being, or smuggling yourself to the place where there are cameras, and spotlights, etc., we are very firm for something which is the indigenous kind of organic as opposed to synthetic type of a volunteerism. But we are not alone on that. I'm absolutely aware that the whole Europe, and not only Europe, but basically manipulating with this, what is a volunteerism, trying to do as much as possible on this kind of a commanding height approach. And you can do different things. Some of them are right, some of them are basically, you have to find the right balance. And let me talk about those few elements. Whoa, I still have 5 minutes. First, obviously, is the legal recognition. And as you know, 70 countries since last 2001, I guess, 70 countries changed the legislation in order to recognize volunteers, including Poland. Actually, I'm one of the co-author of the Polish law on the public benefit and volunteers, whatever. It did some good, it did some harm, as always, but I think we are trying to master the kind of art of regulating just enough, because obviously it's the tendency to make a lot of, recommendation on the legal part of the equation. It's very complicated. One should be careful. We make a very kind of a careful learning curve in Poland about how to regulate that thing. Second, obviously, is that you have a recognition in terms of the public policy, and if it goes beyond the paper, it obviously might cost money, and it's tough, because it might cost money for, insurance or keeping us as the part of the educational credit, or even opening public institution for volunteerism. It's not so easy. So if you go beyond rhetoric to kind of a practice, it's very complicated. And since we are the host of that thing, but we and many other people spend a lot of time working on a kind of a long-term development policy for volunteers in Poland, we are just waiting to see whether it's just a paper or it's a practice. Other elements of recognition is obviously educational, but I'm going to skip it since there were so many very important elements of that. But it's true that the education should recognize volunteers as a part of the life experience and education. Next element is obviously, you mentioned the private sector and the trade unions and the private entrepreneurs, and I understand the next speech will be about the private sector approach to that. And again, we can try to pretend, but it's not very clear that we are kind of friends forever with the trade unions. I mean, not say that, because it's obviously not the case. In this country, volunteerism is too small to be even recognized as a kind of a threat for the trade unions and the kind of a concept of what is important in life. But in many other countries, as you know, it's not so easy. It's not so easy. It will be kind of Europe is approaching this kind of end of work prophecy. And we have to think about how to divide what left, in a sense. And I think with the trade unions, we have a big debate. I don't know how many trade unions activists are on that table, on that room, but obviously it's not so simple. In terms of I think the biggest challenge, it's for the third sector. I mean, I'm the third sector activist for many years. And we're still trying to push people to say, okay, and it's always, we think the problem is a motivation of especially young people to be volunteers. So there are two ways of doing that. One is a push thing, so basically preaching people, evangelizing, you have to be volunteer, it's a good thing for you, etc. I think the bigger problem actually is on the demand side. And I think one can see even the volunteerism as a kind of almost as a natural resource. And you have people who can make good management of natural resource and people who will ruin them. And being honest, although second biggest problem for Polish NGOs, but it's not only in Poland, is the lack of people who are on a voluntary basis are going to be a part of the organization. And you can throw money on organization, but actually it's going to make things much more complicated from that point of view, as the reverse. But being honest, and many organizations are, kind of crying about the lack of volunteerism, while in the same moment they are not able to provide kind of enough decent, kind of a culture of working with volunteers. So many often they would rather do a ceremony once a year as a kind of a replacement of actually daily respect for the work of the volunteers. So volunteers are the biggest, is a kind of a diamond in the crowd in the third sector. In the same moment, it's a very complicated for many organizations, especially those who have big access to EU money or the government money, because the volunteers within the organization is a kind of a sensor of integrity. And actually, the sense, it's like if they are not paid with money, they have to be paid either with respect or with the kind of feeling that it makes sense. If you don't have this currency, actually, you're in a very bad position. And I'm simply trying to say that many organizations have to invent this special ingredient to pay back volunteers in this sense. So it brings me to the last point, which is basically, I think it will be always this kind of a moral hazard, in a sense, of saying, on one hand, traditional virtue of volunteerism is that I'm doing, my left hand don't know what my right hand is doing. So the kind of a traditional approach to the kind of the most respectful volunteerism is this thing which is done not just for event, not just for show, but kind of a long-term, being with someone, being committed, not being actually awarded. And we have to be very careful with all this quasi-currency we put on the other side. Because obviously they might be, in some cases, cards, recognitions, credits, whoever. They might be money in some cases, they might be some awards, etc., but we have to be careful not to mix the kind of basic assumption of volunteerism, which is that it is a non-instrumental thing. And you should not go too much beyond the moral satisfaction and the kind of a life experience. Because otherwise, it's basically we're doing a bad thing. We're doing a bad thing for that. And obviously, in this kind of a game of the recognition and the kind of a bribing volunteerism, we have to be very careful. We have to step back to the whole system of motivation. For young people in this network society, they basically collect everything they need. They collect, they invest, they collect educational points, if you like. For older generation, it's completely reversing it, if you like. It's giving back. It's actually not being recognized. It's being recognized in a very, very different way. So what I'm trying to say really is that I'm crossed for 2 minutes. So anyway, that arithmetics of exchange has to be very carefully balanced, not to spoil things, which I hope and whatever. I don't have a great point for the end because time is past, but I think you feel this kind of, reflection as not being aggressive or anything, a bit provocative for all of us, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also here, I think we can take this message also to the discussion later.